40 here. I wonder if you know how it feels to be left outside alone. I wonder if you know how it feels to be left inside alone in your cubicle. You clock in your cubicle at Wells Fargo Bank, and 4 days later, your body is discovered. So, what sort of person can go to work, clock in, die, and not have their body discovered for 4 days? It's someone who doesn't have particularly close ties to other people. What would happen if you went to a remote job? Let's say you clocked in at a cubicle and you had a heart attack or a stroke. How long till someone would raise an alarm that you were missing? Or if you needed to go to the ER, go to the hospital, right? Who would you turn to for a ride? I remember when I was covering the porn industry, there were people in the porn industry who would turn to me in emergency when they were suicidal or when they needed an emergency ride to or from the hospital. Because the overwhelming characteristic of people in the porn industry is that they had few ties to other people. And much of the same would be true for the more radical members of the alt-right. They have few ties to family and friends outside the movement. Or someone I know had a seizure, and if his roommate hadn't been there to call 911, if he'd been living on his own, right, it could have been curtains. Right, we did not evolve to live solitary lives. So I was talking to Kip about this last night on the show, and he was talking about how intense his identification was with many of his sporting heroes. And I felt the same way, right? I had an intense identification with Roger Staubach. And then with Ronald Reagan and Dennis Prager, right? And normal people don't have these intense parasocial relationships. If you were devastated when that actor from Cheers died of ketamine about a year ago, right? Or if you're devastated for days on end when your favorite team loses, right? When I see a sports fan who dresses up in an extreme way to go to a game and dyes his hair with the team's colors, I don't think this is a normal, thriving human being with a good career and a good life trajectory. Right? The more intense the sports fandom, the more disordered, unbalanced, and lacking the life. The more intense your parasocial relationships, meaning your one-way relationships with media figures, right? The more lacking, disordered, empty your life. Right? Normal people get upset by what goes on with people they know. But if you're not enjoying normal relationships with other people, then you're going to have to attach to something, and you're very likely attached to media figures, public figures, and it's particularly true of narcissists, right? If you feel you're special, and nobody who knows you in real life has the same opinion, then I'm speaking from first-hand experience, then you're very likely to idealize all sorts of people who you don't know while devaluing the people you do know. Right? That was my lifelong habit in narcissism. I would devalue the people I knew well, and I'd idealize the people I don't know well. So Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's mother made the point that she said, the only people I know who are happy are people I don't know well. So it's a wake-up call. All right, if you're taking to bed for days and weeks on end when Hillary Clinton does not win the 2016 election, it's a wake-up call. Something's really missing in your life. So much of the left is heading for a substantial mental health crisis if Donald Trump wins the presidential election this fall. So people on the left tend to be much more intensely involved in politics than people on the right. So a tiny proportion of Donald Trump's followers went nuts in the fall of 2020. But overall, most conservative Americans just got on with their lives. Right? Their lives primarily don't revolve around parasocial relationships with political figures. Politics is not one of the three most important things in their life. In all likelihood, what's most important in their life is family, career, community, religion, friends, sports, hobbies, volunteering opportunities, learning new skills. Right? For normal people, these are your top priorities. But for people who are intensely left-wing, intensely attached to the political, right? When the political doesn't go their way, they're heading for a major mental health crisis now. It's not so much the Donald Trump election that's going to cause this crisis. The Donald Trump election is going to reveal this crisis. It's going to lay open this substantial mental health crisis on the left that operates right now. Right? The more intense your politics, usually the more empty your life. Right? If all you can think about themes of capitalism or communism or human biodiversity, immigration, reproductive freedom, or even religious dogma, if that's what dominates your thinking, right? You've got an empty life. Because what should dominate your thinking 95% of the time is your own well-being, and that should principally revolve around your relationships with your family and closest friends and the people you spend the most time around, such as at work and in education. Such a sad story, this woman. I think it was a woman. Anyway, checks in Wells Fargo, clocks in at a cubicle, and she's found dead 4 days later. And so usually that feeling of loneliness, right, it's a human alarm system that something's wrong in your life. Now, you can be very happy with solitude. So solitude and loneliness are completely different things. All right, I enjoy spending a lot of time alone, reading books, writing essays, preparing for my shows, going for walks, listening to audible books. Right, I love it. I'm not lonely usually during that time. But occasionally, when I do feel lonely, right, it's an alarm bell that something's off in my life. And so if I went missing, right, who would notice, right? And I do have people close to me who would notice and would sound the alarm within hours. I didn't meet a responsibility the other day, and in a little over an hour, the other party called my emergency contact. And I'd sent an email notifying that I wouldn't be at such and such a time and date, but they hadn't received my email. But they checked in with my emergency contact. Okay, here's what gets me about news media coverage. Blessings to Elliot Blatt. Has the adrenaline died down after you favorably acquitted yourself last night on that live stream? All right, you were not prepared or intending to go up against Richard Spencer, who is a master debater. He is a master orator. He is fantastic in live streams, spaces, podcasts, right? He has a theatrical background. He has a melodic way of speaking. He's able to bring a emotional intensity to his words, so they usually seem terribly, terribly important and exciting and dramatic. You feel like you're getting valuable insights that you can't get anywhere else. Similar to Barack Obama. Barack Obama has a way of speaking that makes you feel good. It's melodic. It's done with great authority. And then Elliot finds himself going up against the master, and Elliot acquits himself very honorably. Doesn't punch low, doesn't punch right, doesn't punch left, just punches straight ahead, and simultaneously stands up for himself. Am I allowed to finish a sentence? Elliot kept saying, am I allowed to finish a sentence? Because if you get into a space where people don't allow you to finish a sentence, right, after you try 3-4 times, then it's time to give up. But Elliot stood his ground, made his points. Good job, Elliot Blatt. But here's what I'm burning on this morning. It's the news coverage of Donald Trump retweeting on Truth Social a post saying how blowjobs changed 2 women's lives, Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. And the way the news media covers this story is that Will Trump's racist and misogynistic social media posts hurt him with the voters that he needs to win. And so the news media story is always Trump's racist and sexist and misogynistic slurs, which is the imposition of a hero system on top of and instead of and in place of what Trump actually said. So they won't tell you what Trump said. So often you'll hear about a Baltimore Orioles baseball player getting suspended for 2 games because he used a homophobic slur. Right? And this is just the imposition of one particular liberal left hero system, substituting in place of describing the reality of what he said. Right? The baseball player called a fan an effing F word. And Donald Trump pointed out that Kamala Harris got her start in politics, right, as Willie Brown's mistress. It's interesting that doesn't get much attention. Right? Kamala Harris did sleep her way into political power. But it's a very awkward story to tell. The news media is very loath to touch it. It reminds me of a story in the New York Times by a reporter named Ben about body image issues in women's tennis. How come more female tennis players don't look like Serena Williams? Right, Serena Williams, right, is muscular, broad-shouldered, big biceps. Right, she looks like a National Football League linebacker. But in the second paragraph of the New York Times story, it calls her a symbol of beauty. And then it alleges, right, essentially that any female tennis player could look like her if they only trained to do so. So I don't know if that's true, if just any woman could achieve those degrees of muscles without using steroids. I don't know if Serena Williams is using steroids. But then it explores how many of the female tennis players interviewed don't want to look like that because they still want to retain their femininity. Is it Maria Sharapova, that really attractive blonde tennis player who didn't win many tournaments but was a fan favorite because she was so beautiful? Well, now I'm thinking about it, there are many male tennis players who are not muscular. Right? Who's that bloke had a long career and just retired 2 years ago in tennis? He won something like 12 Grand Slam titles. He was from Scandinavia, and he was not muscled at all. He just looked like a completely ordinary bloke. And then on the other hand, you do have heavily muscular tennis players. So there doesn't seem to be much connection between being heavily muscular and winning. All right, a lot of winning tennis players do not have prominent, thick muscles and win a lot of tournaments. And then you have a substantial number who are thick. It reminds me of the Olympics, the 400-meter race. And so there was an American in that race. Looked like he was obviously struggling. He was with about 100 meters to go. He looked struggling and in pain, and he was in something like fourth place. And then he ripped off something like a 12-second 100-meter sprint and ended up winning the gold. And that was a big exception to normally in a competition, whether running or tennis, the more graceful athlete usually wins, the one who displays the least effort, right? Usually the athletes who display the most effort. All right, that usually goes with a more clumsy performance, and the more graceful athlete is more finely tuned, and they display more ease, and so they will usually be using their energy and their abilities more effectively. There's less interference between their brain synapses and what their body does. So usually in competitions, the more graceful athlete wins over the one displaying the most effort, intensity, pain. Yeah, who's that? Federer. Yeah, Federer. Tennis sucks, but it's better than soccer. Tennis is about agility and stamina. Right, so I'm right. There's no major link between thick muscles and winning in tennis. Now, there are different philosophies for constructing the National Football League defense and offense. So the Cowboys were traditionally built on speed. Jimmy Johnson wanted to build on speed and trickery, misdirection. And Tom Landry told his Cowboys before the 1975 Super Bowl, don't get into a fight with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers were heavily roided up, and Landry knew that the Cowboys would lose if they got into physical confrontations with the Steelers, because the Steelers were simply stronger. And in the National Football League, usually the stronger team wins, and the Steelers did win. In large part, they did it by knocking out several Dallas Cowboy receivers. They broke their ribs, knocked them out of the game. So San Diego Chargers, I think, started out as the most steroid-heavy National Football League or AFL team in the 60s. And then it became the Steelers in the 70s, particularly their offensive line and their defensive front. And then the Cowboys took it on later. But if you look at pictures of Cowboy offensive linemen versus Steeler linemen in the 70s, right, the Cowboy linemen would typically have stomachs that bulged over their belt because they weren't on steroids. And the Steelers were all massively jacked up because they were on steroids. Did you watch the Netflix show Wrestlers? It's done by Greg Whiteley, who did the Last Chance U Netflix series and the series on America's Sweethearts, the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders. He just does great real-life documentaries. And there was a telling scene, I think in the third episode, where the main character says that the people who get into wrestling, right, they're usually quite antisocial. And if they weren't in wrestling, they'd be getting into far more trouble in their life. And it reminded me so much of the porn industry, that a lot of people enter the porn industry and get clean from their drug and alcohol addictions, right? So obviously getting into the porn industry is a bad decision, But for some people, it appears to be the least bad decision, right? If they weren't in the porn industry, they'd be selling drugs or just working as regular prostitutes, or they'd just be strung out. And in the porn industry, they find community, they find acceptance, and they often get sober from drug and alcohol addiction in the porn industry. So it's usually a choosing between worse and much worse options for people. So there's probably something to the concept of harm reduction. But I was struck by my time in the porn industry and my time in interviewing people on the alt-right that these two extreme spheres of American life are just dominated by those lacking normal human connections, and how that releases people to say some really funny things because you're not worried about the consequences to your family and friends, your social position, right? You're willing to burn your bridges to polite society, and that can unleash great insight, humor, honesty. Unfortunately, it tends to be accompanied by a much greater amount of self-destruction, antisocial behavior. So if we could, for some people though, they manage to pull off the benefits, right? The higher functioning people, right? They pull off the benefits of expanding the Overton window, but because they have enough relationships in their life that they want to hang on to, they don't spiral into the self-destruction. Where you at? I'm at UCLA, bro. Run the damn ball. Yeah, that's what killed me about the 1979 Super Bowl. Cowboys running the damn ball down the field on their opening drive. And then they do a triple reverse, fumble the ball, Steelers recover and drive for a touchdown and end up winning the game 35-31. So I'm in a little bit of a sleep slump. I'm not getting to sleep until after 1 a.m. that I know of. But at least I'm keeping my CPAP on. So I haven't woken up with a headache this week. And if I keep the CPAP on, right, sometimes I'm probably dozing off and not even realizing it. But from what I've read, sleep before midnight is twice as valuable as sleep after midnight. So whatever sleep I'm getting before midnight, I'm getting good quality airflow. So I feel fine. And you probably witness when my Adderall's wearing off. Because let's say I typically take Adderall about 1 p.m. And then I typically start my show about 4:50 p.m. And so you'll watch the Adderall wear off. And I feel it wearing off because I just have less energy, less mental strength. I have things to talk about, and I have less and less willingness to talk about them, to summon the energy to investigate certain ideas or to lay out my thoughts as the show goes on. And so I just start relying more and more on playing other people's ideas as my energy and mental will flags as the Adderall wears off down through the show. So this morning took my first Adderall at about 6 a.m. So I'm 3 hours into my Adderall dosage right now. And in about 50 minutes, I'll start wearing off. Often start yawning a little bit. Just start feeling more blah. Not as enthused. Not as tightly coiled, directed. Not so much of a tight spring unleashing into life. So when you go on modafinil, there's no crash, right? So modafinil will last usually for about 15 hours. You'll have an increased sense of being awake, but its effects are not nearly as dramatic as Adderall. So I did not feel great when I got up this morning. By the time I got out of my cold shower, Right, I was feeling good because I'd already conquered the most difficult part of my day, and it's like a 30-second dopamine fast. All right, I force myself to just stand there under the cold shower, have that dopamine fast, and when I come out of that, right, then I'm usually energized and charged up for the day ahead because I've done the most difficult thing, and everything from there is going to be easier. I've conquered myself. Right, I'm clean and I'm invigorated. Then take my Adderall, have my protein drink, start doing my exercises, listen to Mark Halperin's morning meeting, listen to a 12-step talk, cuts from my Clio clips, have some brekkie, read the papers, make a couple of notes on what I want to talk about, get ready to launch into my day. How about an Adderall shortage? Is it true? Yes, because there's been a dramatic increase in Adderall prescriptions. So there is an Adderall shortage, and it's increasingly challenging to get Adderall prescriptions. And there are major online prescription operations, right? So for me, I was able to get an online consultation, decide whether or not I had ADHD within about 24 hours. And so this has fueled tremendous uptick in people getting ADHD medication, because if I had to wait 3 months, 6 months for an ADHD consultation, which is how it typically works in the normal world of normal online health insurance, and then there's usually a lot that you have to do to get diagnosed. Often you have to bring someone who knows you well. It's not an easy process as an adult. But then with the new online world, it's become much easier. But now one of the major online providers of ADHD treatment has been sued, I think by the FTC, one of those federal governments, for recklessly distributing Adderall. So stimulants have always been very hard to prescribe. I remember back in 2008, I met a psychiatrist through my journalistic endeavors, and she told me that stimulants would likely significantly help me, but that they were very difficult to get a prescription for. And so with the opioid crisis, all right, for years it was too difficult to get pain relief medication, and then perhaps it became too easy. So I'm perhaps not quite as horrified by the Sacklers as is the normal response, right? The Sacklers organized, developed the mass marketing and prescribing of opioids, and it did become too easy and it was done too much. But this was a counterbalance to decades before. It was too difficult to get pain relief medication. And so in the 1950s, anyone could get uppers just over the counter. And I'm sure many people abuse them. But now it's too difficult for many people who need amphetamines and Adderall and stimulants. Right? It's just too difficult. Many people who would benefit from being on them are not on them. And yet, yeah, there's also some abuse. How many days of Adderall have I socked away? I think at a normal take it at a normal prescribed rate, I've got about 2 months worth, but I could get by for 5 months by just taking it when I needed it. So for example, I don't need Adderall to do the show, right? It makes it easier, right? Because it gives me more energy and strength and coherence. But there's usually enough of a dopamine rush and stimuli in just doing a live stream that I don't need Adderall to do it. It's during the more humdrum parts of life that Adderall helps keep you on track. Modafinil provides some ADHD benefit, but not enough to be prescribed for ADHD. But it did improve my ADHD problem, but not as dramatically as Adderall. So I now currently take Adderall 7 days a week, because why would I ever want to be that vulnerable, right? You just tend not to make as good of decisions when you're not medicated. Is the marine layer going to burn off? Yeah, that's one of the things I noticed at UCLA is how much fog there was, and we have June gloom. So we're about 5 miles from the ocean right now, and this is very typical. It's just kind of foggy, overcast, but it burns off often about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, it's very difficult and dangerous to get illegal Adderall overseas. So there are medications, right, that you can reliably get from overseas pharmacies, such as in India. But these are medications that are at the lowest rate of restriction, such as modafinil, right? There's virtually no way to abuse modafinil or Strattera or clonidine, right? These are the lowest level of prescription restriction. And so you can reliably get these at, God forbid, illegal online pharmacies like rxshop.md. Please don't use rxshop.md to illegally obtain prescription medications. You should pay 10 times as much and buy them legally in America. But if you try to buy Adderall overseas, right, you're highly likely to get junk, to get something dangerous, to get something with fentanyl that could very well kill you. So you don't want to be sourcing your Adderall overseas. So the simple dicta is never use an online illegal pharmacy. The more sophisticated dicta is to recognize that using an online pharmacy for certain medications that it's reasonably reliable and safe and cost efficient. But then for other medications like Adderall, you definitely don't want to try to obtain it in an illegal way, because the odds of it being something bad and dangerous are just way too high. Just like you can have the speed limit of 55, and in some areas, right, if you drive 58 miles an hour, you can drive 58 miles an hour for 100 hours and you're never going to come close to getting ticketed. But in Australia, if you drive 3 kilometers over the speed limit, right, you stand a substantial chance of getting ticketed. So enforcement will vary depending on the location.